Okay, last week we talked about right angles, and everybody knows what a right angle is. Right? Everybody knows that a square is made up entirely of right angles. Now, what is an obtuse angle? Anything more than, what is that? So that means that's an obtuse angle, right? And that's an even more obtuse angle. What is an acute angle? Anything smaller than 90 degrees, which means that is an acute angle, and that is a more acute angle. Now here's the thing. You know that in fact a square, which could be the top of a cube, but for simplicity's sake, let's keep it a square. As soon as you tilt it in perspective, though it is made entirely of right angles, no angle in there but right angles, tilt it into 1-point perspective, and you will see that it turns into 2 acute angles and 2 obtuse angles. Acute, acute, obtuse, obtuse. Does that happen when you tilt it in 2-point perspective? It does. You will have 2, what kind? Obtuse and 2 acute. Okay? But of course, it just looks that way. In fact, those are right angles, and they have this illusion of changing when you tilt them because of those principles we've talked about, diminution and convergence and all that. But here's where the question comes in that is confusing at first, which is how acute? I mean, like, that's more acute than that. How obtuse? That's more obtuse than that, right? This could have been, that square in perspective could have been like that, and look, that's almost a right angle. And look, that's less acute than that. How much so? You can, let's say that this is the top, let's keep it a square. You can extend this down and still make it in perspective and make it so that that square, which could be going off to vanishing points, and remember we're looking down on it, so the horizon line is going to be up here somewhere. What I said would turn into an acute and obtuse, you can turn that, look at that's even becoming, that was the obtuse angle, and it's becoming acute. It's becoming less than 90 degrees. So how do you know how far which way or another? Now it's best when you're drawing, you have to have a time to be scientific and a time to be intuitive, or not that the two are necessarily in opposition to each other. When you are drawing, it helps to know where that horizon line is, to know whether you're looking up or down on something. But then the thing to do is don't worry about vanishing points first. Worry about what you're doing. Okay, there's a great big rock here, and there's a guy standing here, and he's looking up at it, and then there comes a time where you'll get scientific. Then you'll put this into a box, and you'll say there's a vanishing point there and a vanishing point there, and if there's a level cliff on that right there, it would go like that, and if somebody wrote something on that rock, it would go like that, and then you'll make it conform. Then you'll find out that this guy stands in something about the size of a telephone booth, and it's going to have lines going like that. You see, you'll have to go into scientific mode to solve draftsmanship problems, but don't start there usually. Start by getting things where you want them, and then you'll fix them later. It's like you don't want to think about grammar when you're writing or when you're speaking. You'll never get anywhere. You don't want to think about correct notes if you're playing a sonata. You need to worry about those correct notes in practice time, and you need to think about grammar in your education and then maybe go back and correct it, but there comes a point where you've just got to let it flow. Because all this perspective business can cripple you. But you've got to ask these questions at one time or another. How far do we put these vanishing points away? How low can this go and still be in our picture plane? And that's what we're going to talk about today. It comes to this. Remember last week we talked about POV. What's POV? Point of view. And we talked about you have to determine how high your eye level is or how low it is. Up to down, the horizon moves with you just like the moon does. And you've got to establish in there somewhere, maybe specifically or maybe just intuitively, where you are left to right in relationship to things. But there's a third dimension, since we're dealing with a three-dimensional illusion, that is, how close am I to the object? That's what we're going to talk about tonight, because it will determine these things. So we've got horizon line for how high the eye level is. Horizon line, we've got, what do we call the thing for left to right? Station point. And then I'm just choosing this term because it makes sense. Proximity, how close you are. Things change when you get close up on them. Getting close up is a part of life. I mean, lovers want to be close up. They don't want to be across the continent. They don't want to be across the room. They want to be as close to each other as possible. Closeness is something that we want. Animals want it. We saw this video about apes. And this ape found this dead mouse and got its eyeball right down there on the ground and looked at that dead mouse like that. And then it jumped up and leapt to the other side and got its eyeball on the other side. Looking at that, the kids like to do that to your face. You know, they like to get right up so it does like a carnival mirror. We want to get close up on things, whether it is a dead mouse or our beloved. And somewhere you've got to ask, how do you do that in a picture? You just make it bigger? Making it bigger is a start, but it won't be enough. You can't just take a cube and go like that and say, that's going to do for being close up. Because when you get close up on a cube, something different happens. Tell me if you can tell the difference between what I'm doing there and what I'm doing here. Can you see that that looks closer up just a bit? And I'm going to exaggerate that more as we go. But before I do, I've got to go into this theoretical mode for a moment and explain something. We didn't talk in here about the cone of vision yet, did we? You see, let's look down on a person's head. There's their nose. We're going to pretend like we've got one eye, but even if we include two eyes, you look out something like that, right? You do not, like a fly, see like that. You just can't. Right? You cannot see 360 degrees around yourself. You've got this cone of vision that goes out. And how wide is that cone of vision? It is arguably about 60 degrees, which means, what, if that's a right angle, right, half of a right angle is 45, so it'd be a little less. It would be an angle something like that you're seeing out. Now, it could be more, it could be less, and it depends on the person. Some people have better peripheral vision. But we say we've got to limit it to something like that. Now, if we do that, if we limit our vision to that cone of vision that we see, which incidentally, as you look out of your eyes, you see something like this, don't you? You got to do this sometime. You got to sit and kind of try to imagine where the borders are of what you see. And you see there's a little indentation there where your nose is. So it's, somebody mentioned, Daniel mentioned, somebody else mentioned about all this linear perspective. It isn't really true, is it? I mean, it's more curves, and that's correct. All this straight line business in your field of vision doesn't happen. You can see that in camera lenses, how things start to curve toward the edges. That's what happens in your eyesight. But all this perspective business is complicated enough with straight lines. And straight lines are a way of simplifying it. So we're going to keep with the straight line business and not get off into metaphysics or anything like that. We're going to stay with vanishing points and straight lines, and then when you get more advanced, you can curve everything. Now, if on the other side of the picture plane that this character's looking at, let's say that the picture plane is right here. And we'll put a box there like that. Let's say that in that box is a little girl, another box over here, and in that box is a great big bear. We'll put the claws coming out toward the little girl. And over here we'll say there's a picnic basket. And you know, we could figure the little girl sitting there eating her picnic basket. What has this guy got in his vision? What can he see with that cone of vision? Probably something like that. Now, if we want him to see more, we can widen his cone of vision, which starts to distort things, or we can do what? We can just pull him back, same cone of vision, same angle, and he'll include the picnic basket and all that. If we move him in closer, so that his head is right there, same cone of vision, he's going to see just her. You see how we've got a cone of vision that's looking at a picture plane, but it's not just what you take in. I mean, as you step back, you'll see more, but something happens as you get closer to this. And I'm going to have to keep it simple, but D'Amelio's book explains this over and over, so if you're reading D'Amelio's book, you'll get it. Here's our character. Give him some shoulders, and give him an arm, a couple arms, pointing in a direction. If you stand in front of a window, if I've got a window in front of me, I was sitting in front of my window testing this today, and there's that table on the other side, and I've got glass window here. If I point my arm in the direction of this line on the table, and that window extends, the point that I'm pointing at will be the vanishing point for that line on the window. If I point in the direction of this line on the table, that is, I point parallel, my arm is parallel to that line, it will touch the window at the same point that all those vanishing points there. So in other words, if this guy is pointing parallel to that box with that arm, right? He's pointing that way. And parallel to that one with that arm, the vanishing points to him are going to be right there. It does happen. In this guy's field of vision, there will be a vanishing point that will intersect at the same point. That's going to go off, and it's going to appear to disappear somewhere there. Of course, his field of vision, I happen to make it for simplicity's sake, all of this the same. Now, what will happen if he moves in and points his arms like that? What will happen to the vanishing points? Remember, he's parallel, pointing in the direction of that line and that line. That's not his field of vision. That's a right angle, right? His field of vision is 60 degrees, so it's going to be more like that. What happens to those vanishing points? They move closer. That's the big secret for tonight. I want to tell you what photographers know about perspective. And photographers, we could divide up their lenses into 4 different kinds. What's the kind that you would use if you're trying to photograph and get close up on wild animals, but you don't like to put yourself at risk? Telephoto. A telephoto lens. And what are the numbers that people put on? What would a millimeter number be? Come on, none of you are photographers? A 500 millimeter lens is a telephoto lens. Okay? Let's say that you just want a standard lens. What we'll call it. What would a standard millimeter lens be? 50 is pretty standard. 80 is okay too, but we'll say, well, let's say 80. 50 is standard on most 35 millimeter cameras, which remember, 35 millimeter camera doesn't have anything to do with millimeter of lens. That's 35 millimeters of film, and this has to do with focal lengths, which is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, there's another kind, which if you want to get more in the picture, what do you call them? Wide angle lens. And what is a real standard wide angle lens? 28 millimeter lens. If you've got your Minolta or your Nikon or your Canon and you want a wide angle lens, you buy a 28, because if you go for 24, it's going to cost you a lot more for that lens. Okay, now there's a really severe wide angle lens. What's it called, Daniel? Fisheye. A fisheye lens. And what is a fisheye lens? What kind of numbers are we talking about? An 8 millimeter lens is a fisheye lens. Okay. A telephoto lens looks like that when you're looking down. I mean, I can turn it into ellipses here so you'll see what I'm talking about. It looks like that, and then the camera would be here. It connects onto the camera, and you got your shutter button there. It looks like that. What does a standard lens look like? About how much of that? Yeah, it's probably going to be something like that. And what happens when you start to get a wide angle lens? You've got a very shallow cylinder like that. Now here's what goes on there. I'm going to tilt this up. When you've got the film right there, this is where the image is going to go on that film. We're looking down on this camera. Look at what is happening with the angle of the way the image, the buildings or the elephant 3 blocks away, gets in there. It comes in here like this. Do you see that? Now let's say that we're doing the wide angle lens. How does it get in there? Do you see the difference between the telephoto and the wide angle? And what happens when you do the fisheye lens? Let's do a fisheye lens on there. Okay, that's why these are called focal lengths. The longer the length, the more acute this angle will be. The shorter the length, the wider and more obtuse this angle will be. Okay, that theory in photography relates directly to what I'm talking about tonight for the picture plane and perspective and how close you get on things. Remember this diagram, because that's what it's about. And let me demonstrate it. Here's a picture plane. It's a window. It looks out at a street that has telephone poles on it. We'll make it so that the street has a horizon line right there. And there's going to be a telephone pole that's going to start down here. And it's going to be this great big thing there. And then as the next one might be, something like that. Actually, we need to start it way over here to keep it on that line. And the next one like that, they're going to get smaller and smaller as they go back. We'll talk about how much smaller. But let's say, look at this. We've got telephone poles that are getting smaller and smaller as they go back. The difference between, I could have cropped it differently, but I didn't. There's going to be one over here that's going to be real big. The difference between this telephone pole and this telephone pole is a big difference, right? The difference between these telephone poles is going to get less different. They're all just little lines out there. When you use this telephoto lens, what do you get? You can't get a view like that. What do you get? You get this part right here magnified really big on the film so that the picture plane of telephone poles looks like this. They're all just pretty much the same size repeated over and over. But when you get the wide angle lens, what happens? The first telephone pole is huge. The next one's kind of small. The third one's really small. And then as they keep going back, they just start to get big. Do you get the idea? That is the difference between we're taking it severe now. As you in between, there's a lot of gradation. A fisheye lens does something interesting. What does a fisheye lens always do to the negative? What is the shape of it? You got a 35 millimeter negative that's something like that, and what is the shape of a fisheye lens? It turns it into a circle, and there's a reason why. Your vanishing points become right there. Actually, when you've got a fisheye lens, let's say that you've got a cube or something like that, and that cube could be somebody's head. You know what happens? You also get a vanishing point. Actually, you get a vanishing point right there. So 3-point, you'll also get a vanishing point right here. So 4-point, and that's why you get everything bends. Everything curves with a fisheye lens. The whole world curves. And you could even argue that you've got vanishing points all around there. Now what's been happening on all of these? The vanishing points, the further away they are, the more they're going to be like a telephoto lens. The closer in, the more they're going to exaggerate to make this a more acute angle, which means you're coming closer in. And so the trick with photography is simply, if you want something to look big, and it's not that big, use a what? Use a wide-angle lens. I was talking to an art director on the phone yesterday who was shooting a picture of a wallet stuffed with money, and was going to have me make it look bigger and fatter. And I said, well, you know, you might just shoot it with a wide-angle lens and make sure that you're up close on it. And he said, hey, Kaz, do you have a wide-angle lens? Kaz said, yeah. And he said, let's do it with a wide-angle lens. Yeah, which I told him, you may not need me, but he still needs me to do more. But, you know, that's the way you make something look big. If it's not big, get a wide-angle lens on it, can get close on it, and you know what happens. You've seen it where you get close, you know, and the nose gets really big. Here's the way to think of it. Your eyes are the film, and the picture plane is the lens. Now let me demonstrate in two-point perspective this concept. Esther, do you see why I didn't want to spend 10 minutes explaining that other concept? I'm going somewhere with this. I'm making one big point, which is this. Here's our picture plane, and we're going to have a box, say the eye level is right there. We're going to have a box here that little Red Riding Hood is sitting in, or whatever you want to put in here. And we're going to place the vanishing points outside the picture plane there, and then I'm going to aim at those vanishing points. It's hard to do this big, but you see that part of it is aiming. Okay, we've got that looks sort of like those telephone poles would look through a telephoto. I mean, that's not exaggerated closeness. Now you want to do the same box and see what happens if instead of having the vanishing points that far away, let's put them just outside the picture plane. Let's measure this so that it's the same height, and then do all this. Now, which one of those boxes looks bigger? Does that one not look bigger? I mean, we could also make it so that our eye level was down low, so that we're looking up at it. And you get this kind of effect. In fact, let's do that. If I have a box that's sitting there on the picture plane like that, doesn't that look like, now it looks like you're looking up at, your little Red Riding Hood looking up at a building. Whereas if I take that same point of view, put the vanishing points further away, that is, make them way over there, do you see? You see the difference? Here's the way to think of it. Let's turn this into a picture plane looking down on it again. If you've got a character here looking out at that picture plane, there's going to be vanishing points there. Actually, here's a way to look at it. Think of it as an equilateral triangle. If this person is that far away, make it so the vanishing points would be about that far away. If you pull this character out, those vanishing points are going to be that far away. Try to think, and if you move this character in, the vanishing points are going to be that far away. Always think of it as an equilateral triangle. Closer I get to it, what happens? Vanishing points move in. Move back from the picture plane, vanishing points move out. And that is what happens when you look at a big building from across the harbor. It doesn't really look that big, except that you know it's big. You can't tell from your eyes, though. I mean, your eyes are not giving you a hint that it's big. We were sitting out on our porch the other night, or the other late afternoon. It was still daytime. And there was a moon up there, like a white smudge of chalk on a bright blue sky. And we were looking at the moon, talking about the moon, and then a helicopter came by. We started talking about the helicopter, And then my 3-year-old said, ah! Oh, I thought it was going to hit the moon. I remember one time he was talking about how the moon was about the size of his hand. He doesn't know yet. And you can't tell from a picture. You can't tell by what's going on in your eyes that the helicopter wasn't going to hit the moon. You can only tell because you know now, right? So it is when you look at those buildings across the harbor. There are these little buildings. They could be cigarette packs for all you know. But you happen to know they're big. The way they look big is that when you get up close to them, they fill your field of vision, which means the vanishing points come in here like that, and you look up and, whoa, it's this severe acute angle up there. You can make a cigarette pack look that big by getting right up on it like that ape got up on that mouse. Get right up on it, and it fills your field of vision, and the same thing happens. Those vanishing points pull in, and the top of that cigarette pack goes acute, and it looks towering. So when you get up close to something that's not so big, the same thing happens in your field of vision as when you stand in front of a big building 40 feet away from it. Does that make sense? But here's the secret. Remember, the closer you get on something, the more you'll pull those vanishing points in. The more you step back because you want to flatten out the space, the more you'll pull the vanishing points out. So what do photographers use for portraits? Do they use 28mm lens? We did this afternoon because we were trying to make funny portraits. What do you normally use? What numbers? 80 to 200. Why? Because 80mm lenses are about the point of telephoto where you don't make the face look really big. You don't get a wide-angle effect. You don't distort the face. So when I did those original funny heads of me and Nigel, Nigel has a pretty flat, chunky face. So I got a telephoto lens and got on the other side of the room because I wanted his face to be even flatter and chunkier. But for my head, we put the wide-angle lens on. That way we got even more of this. This comes into drawing pictures. And I'm going to show you an example. I was thinking these exact principles when I was doing the preliminary work for it. This was my third picture for Alice in Wonderland, and I was trying to do thumbnails, and Daniel Dunphy was looking at this picture that John Tenniel did of the Duchess with me, and he said, you know, I told him I didn't want Alice in any of these. I didn't want to commit myself to it. I wanted it from Alice's point of view. And he said, well, it'd be interesting to do that scene from Alice's point of view. Do the Tenniel scene from that point of view. And I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want that kitchen, something like that kitchen. So I did about maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 thumbnails. And this was the thumbnail that I landed on. And most people would look at that thumbnail and not know what's going on. I know what's going on. That is, I wanted, she is a little bit above the Duchess who's sitting down. I wanted her eye coming at you big. So I started to develop it a little further, I lost what was going on somewhere in here, but it changed quite a bit by the time. I kept doing it in tracing paper overlays, of which I show you crucial steps. You'll notice a little map right here. That map is a map of the room, looking down on the room with a cone of vision, 90 degrees of Alice, and what she sees. And that way I can say, okay, Duchess will be there, that will be there, I can include this. And there was a point at which I thought of the Duchess's head, even though I do show it in here a little bit. There's some lines showing it. I thought of it as a box, but not a box like this. Her head would fit in a box like that. I thought of it as a box like this. Can you see that? Which means, look at what's happening. Actually, it's more foreshortened than that. Look at what's happening on the front of the face. If this eye fits in there and that eye fits in there, do you see how that eye is going to be bigger? Whereas if I do that over here, look at the difference between that eye and that eye is not as big as this eye and this eye. So I was thinking that way and also thinking like that, right? That ear is going to be there. I didn't draw the lines out because I didn't need to at this point, but I would have about 4 or 5 years ago to try to solve these draftsmanship problems and make it so that that head exists in space. So this does come into things like hair and faces and placement of ears. Any questions about this? Does it make sense? Okay, so we've solved 3 problems. We solved the problem of that you have to know how high you are. You should know where you are left to right, although you start to figure that out when you start to draw anything in there. Oh, that's to my right, that's to my left, and I can see that edge. And you should know how close you are, because it's going to affect solving these problems. That's for right angles. Next week, I'm going to talk about the importance of seeing through the form, especially if you're drawing people in a room or things in a room. You need to know what the ground plan looks like. You need to know where things fit on the floor, and the way to draw a bunch of stuff in a room is sketch out that floor plan in perspective first, and then you can just lift stuff up out of it. You don't have to do that. Drew Struzan did the Return to Oz poster where he had all those characters on that couch that was flying through the air, and they were physically impossible. You couldn't have fit them all on there. And he changed the proportions of everything. I mean, there was a lion that was supposed to be twice as big as another character, 3 or 4 times as big, and he made it so it was almost the same size. Why? What's more important than draftsmanship? Composition. That's more important than draftsmanship. But it's a drag if you want to solve draftsmanship problems and you don't know how. Next week we'll talk about right angles again, and specifically about seeing through structure, seeing through boxes, and seeing into the floor plan and where things exist in a room. Okay?